So as you see, it's getting a bit boring if you look to Germany after these very, very busy moves in New York City, also Paris we will see, because I will talk a lot about continuity. This is a typical post-war railway station with bicycle parking not so bad. That was possible by a tradition in the meantime that if there is investment by state money for the municipalities, that the cycling is included about since 30 years now. And I wondered whether it should be more interesting for you to talk about new developments in the Netherlands, our neighbor country, where just last year huge bicycle garages at railway station were introduced, and in general we learn a lot of other neighbor countries like Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, also Austria in the meantime, to have a better organization of public transport as well as cycling. So there are very different cycling cultures, but nevertheless, I think transferable should be there because needs are the same. So first, I would like to bore you with some statistics with a closer focus to Berlin, because it's in a similar size like Madrid. The main exception is that it has not so much cities around for political reasons of the past. And then I going through the organization with the federal level and the region, the Länder, with some actual challenges and ending up with some actual projects. So first we have to see that the post-war growth of car traffic has really changed about 1 decade ago, and some scientists name the people that go into pension just now the generation car. So we have one trend that there is still very high level of car use concentrated in the elderly, especially because the female elderly now in this cohort, in this generation, have driving license compared to their mothers and grandmothers. We also see that there is a renaissance of urban life that you can see in the stop of the drop of walking modal share, and cycling and public transport, not so bad, is increasing at a not so big level. And if you look closer, what has happened between the two last surveys nationwide, we are waiting for the figures of the actual ones. We see a very similar picture that we have seen in the SUMP for Barcelona before. So strong movement in the cycling share, also walking going up, public transport not so bad going up, and car drivers and especially passengers going down. Passengers in cars, these are the children, as we have seen before the lunch break. I think this is a similar problem as it was introduced here for the Spanish situation, but possibly not so hard because we are close to the Netherlands, and parts of Germany have a behavior that was introduced by John Adams as the specific Dutch experience. Some words about Berlin. From the history, it is a very compact city, not as compact as Madrid. It is a city with low motorization because in larger part there was a wall around for 40 years. It is only half the motorization compared to Munich, for example, and therefore is a very fine laboratory for what might be happen to sustainable mobility in future. It also has an SUMP since that time, and it has lots of statistics. And what's very impressive to see what's going on in the urban young generation. We have this very short period between two surveys, 2002 and 2008, and we see that in the age group of that time and this time, we have an enormous shift in the behavior away from the car drivers to the cycling. And if we count all that together, this trend from the urban young society now dominates the figures in the meantime, that the volume of cycling in Berlin has doubled within around about 1 decade. How did that come? I think it did not come from infrastructure first. It came out of society, of lifestyles and so on. And this lifestyle aspect was encouraged by a campaign, Zero CO2 campaign. It was named Turn Brain On, Turn Engine Off. And it might be interesting for you that it was funded by money coming out of international emission trade. So this might be, for funding problems in the future, a new source of funding that with an increased volume of international CO2 trade. Also those campaigns like this poster cannot be big enough to say thank you for cycling and walking, to encourage the walking and cycling might be an interesting innovation as we see it in Germany and in a larger extent also in Austria. These are the main figures as you see here. Again, the car use is dropping from 38 to 32%, and in the bottom right you see that the target figure for 2025, it's ambitious, it's a share of 25%, and the politicians were not so clear how to divide the other 75%. They also named it as a kind of, well, cooperation of the environmental sound modes, and especially the question what market goes to public transport and goes to cycling was not declared. The main reason for that is not just doing good things for cyclists and public transport users, but also to car drivers, because already now the traffic jams are very, very rare in Berlin. There are restrictions in parking that are very hard in this compact city, but I think one of the progress that is going to come is that it will stay a car drivers paradise in that way that so many other inhabitants of Berlin do not use a car, and especially there is not such a big belt of suburbs with commuters coming into Berlin as you have it here in Madrid, for example. I think it's good conditions, hopefully, for all people in transport. What about the threats about this fine trend? First, we had this before the lunch break, is on parents, their perception of safety and a general lacking trust into public space. We discussed it enormously, but it's also the question of maintaining the quality of services and infrastructure in a time where austerity politics are linked with public poverty. You have it very hard in Spain, but in a less hard way also in Germany, and especially a huge infrastructure volume that was created during the last decade is just impossible to keep it in proper conditions. And the other threatening trend is that we have this concentration of facilities, also schools and social infrastructure in space, so that the travel distances, especially in the countryside, gets farther and farther and farther. And we have some regions in Germany with not so bad cycling share, but it's dropping because of this increased travel distances. As an urban planner named it, the picture on your left, that's the way my grandparents worked, more or less all walking distance, and now he says that we have in our actual lifestyle our personal metropolis of isolated activity islands spread over the entire region, but they are still linked with fast roads and high motorization, and we all know that this is not a future model, and I think it will not go back to the origin, the very close distances, but we are looking for paths to overcome these enormous volumes of travel distances. And one picture is new for Germany, but it's very interesting and suggesting that the nutrition pyramid that you perhaps know from school, what's good food and drink with the basis nutrition of water and so on, and only a small top with the Swedes, that you can transfer this model of good life into mobility, and distinguishing the passive mobility and the active mobility with cycling and walking as a basis of all mobility. And then I come later to that with the pedelecs, the electric bicycles, have the charm to be in both of these worlds of the passive and active mobility, and maybe become a transition tool to shift a lot from passive mobility by this electric support into active mobility. Just one slide on walking, because if we talk about intermodality, we must talk about walking, but this is not the subject of this conference, but nevertheless, just to remind you that especially the access to railway stations is mainly for pedestrians, and there are lots of interesting planning and experiment. I selected some photographs from Switzerland and from Germany, where this approach of shared space, street design, was adapted to have an optimum access for pedestrians to the railway station and also to other shops. So coming to the main reasons to have a closer look to intermodality. Oh, sorry, I forgot to define it. A monomodality, it's, I think, is if anybody is bound to have just one travel mode. Mostly it's car use, as elderly in Germany used to do it, and now multimodality is exactly defined that if you choose different modes during the week, on the Monday by car, on the Tuesday by bike, on the Wednesday by public transport. And a special form of multimodality is intermodality, that you combine modes from origin, from home to destination, workplace, for example. And the first, and I think the main argument to look for that is that the coverage of space from a public transport stop is widened if you are not walking to it, but if you are cycling to it. And these figures of kilometers are very, very low. The statistics say that cycling has a much higher reach, within reach walking, and pedelec is much more than 4 kilometers. There are average figures now from an own project. This is about 9 kilometers. But this is just for arguments that public transport might be more effective if the coverage of the area is supported by a bigger, quicker mode to the bus stop or to a railway station. And then there is a new discussion. First it was not in the public, but it's getting into public on the conferences now, because public transport is running in Germany into a very difficult situation, that you have enormous rise in the number of passengers on one side, but on the other side equal or even dropping expenditures from the public money. And that means that it's fuller and fuller and fuller, and the capacity restraints have become, not in the countryside, but in the agglomerations, the main the main task to tackle in the public transport planning. And depending from the importance of the cycling that you have in your region, the cycling might have the potential to moderate this workload, especially in the morning peak hour, because morning peak hour is the very critical part of the public transport's economy, because for just 1 hour a day you need additional buses, additional drivers, and so on. And if you succeed that people coming out of the main station from because they have their job in the city center do not go all to buses and trams, but have their own bicycle or any bicycle there, and running, as you see at bottom left, running parallel to the trams, it is a good effect, good impact for the public transport economy. this is a bit controversial now. There is still lacking good evidence from research, but there is another research that says that if this works, there is a disadvantage on the other side, that you have a higher amplitude between summer and winter, so that the impact on the different bicycle use during the seasons might affect the public transport workload or the buses and so on that are needed. And this is a even more critical discussion just now. There are areas in Germany where it's very maritime, like in Holland, only 3 days winter, and others like Berlin, where it's more like in Poland, Eastern Europe, where this is a more serious aspect. So coming to the administration, if we look to Germany, we should remember that there was a change in the constitution that separated the duties of the national level and the regional level. So all we are talking about, public transport and cycling now, in the meantime, is no more the task for the national level, except some pilot projects, research, and so on, but has shifted to the regional level. I call it regional level, the German Länder that creates the Federal Republic. So that on the local level, the main flow of funding and so on comes from the Länder and their decision making, and that means that each of the Länder has its own political agenda, a bit linked with the political rule in these areas. And I had a short look on the public transport legislations, to what extent the cycling is mentioned there. And I saw that there are some of the regions that have not mentioned it, but it was interesting that the 9 out of 15 public transport laws also are having some obligations for the local level and so on for the public transport authorities dealing with cycling. For example, that there should be bicycle parking and park and ride at interchanges. That is a basis to spend money, as it used to be for the last decades. But also, cyclists are in a part of a group with a special care, like children, women, handicapped, and so on. This is some other federal states, and the other, some other, only a few one, the green ones, Bremen and Berlin, both city regions, city republics, go further and say that an integrated bike-exclusive transport system, that's the goal for different reasons, as we all know. And to quote the Berlin ÖPNV-Gesetz, consider bicycles parked and taken with in an adequate way. I think this is a very proper basis to have done the SUMPs and other planning on that. So coming back to the national level, it has still a role to set the legal frame, to have the integration of the regions and so on. And some years ago, also our institute was involved to draft the second cycling plan, national cycling plan, with planning horizon to 2020. And also there, it's quite ambitious. We have the 10% cycling share of all trips nationwide, and should become 15%. It's not very clearly defined as a hard target. It's formulated as an expectation, not to, if the 15% is not achieved, not to have a political defeat from that. But what is interesting, that is some new highlights compared to the previous national cycling plan. That is more on the rural mobility, because this is critical. To achieve the 15% nationwide means that there has to happen something in the rural areas, and also some now special focuses like intermodality. I come to that now. But what might be interesting for you, that This national cycling plan is not drafted on the white paper in the ministry, but was a result of a very intensive consultation of all kinds of stakeholders combined with bicycling, health, environment, and so on, scientists. And there was a conference similar to this here, and you see on the picture down there was a construction wall that you used to have around the construction site, and with lots of hints and proposals and criticism. And for those who know Germany a bit, there was a similar construction fence around the Stuttgart main station with enormous conflict on the reshape of the Stuttgart main station. And in the meantime, this fence has gone to the German Museum of History because it was a very special situation of local population object in a big project with very much of fantasy. So the Baustellenzaun, the fence around construction site, has become a very illustrative means for the Germans remembering the Stuttgart 21 conflict. So what is in the National Cycling Plan on intermodality? First, it fixes that much more bicycle parking, especially at railway stations, is needed because compared to the Netherlands, more or less all railway stations are repaired, renewed now, but the volumes are not satisfactory for the future. And the next is that there will be additional research, especially how to deal with the cycling at home in the multi-story houses, because this is totally not solved and might be the main bottleneck for future cycling policy, that the landlords are in general responsible, but there's a big interest of all administrative levels to have a solution in a way that lots of people can have their safe, their bicycles safe stalled close to their home. Mobility management was already seen before, that it's also responsibility of the employers. And e-mobility, that's new. It's a very big funding from the federal state, mainly motivated by industry policy. Roughly spoken, that the German car manufacturers will sell cars to China when China switches from gasoline to electric mobility in future. And some very fine projects. For example, the Bicycle Academy is held in Difu to disseminate new knowledge and to have capacity building in especially rural areas nationwide. And if you want to know more, mainly in German language, but also some in English, you find this very big cycling knowledge portal with the abbreviation of the Nationale Radverkehrsplan. So this is the main approach of the national cycling strategy, that it's an overall approach, not just infrastructure, not just advertise and marketing, but also legal frame and so on, and also intermodality with the railways integrated. So just some aspects from all of that. I think if we talk about intermodality, we should also have a look on what's going on with the maps. I saw the beautiful maps, cycling maps of Madrid with the metro stations printed in. And what is the new innovation, that there are so-called cycle tour planners, where you can have your app on the smartphone and can prepare the GPS tracking and so on. And what's new, that this is also integrating the public transport, sometimes also public transport timetables, and lots of other points of interests. And the other main impact coming from the federal level, you might not think about this in the first moment, is that in many cases cycling and handicapped people have same interests, to have access to railways and so on, so that the cycling is not explicitly planned in those planning to have adequate service to the handicapped. For example, this picture of Berlin shows the metro and rail network, and all stations that are with an obstacle that are not accessible by wheelchair just lined out. So this is the offer that for people with kinderwagens, wheelchairs, cyclists brought into metro is offered by the Berlin Public Transport Authority. And there is a new legislation, updated passenger transport legislation that urges for year 2022 that all public transport should be comprehensively barrier-free, and we know that this is impossible to achieve, but the exceptions from these rules had to be defined in the public transport planning. So cycling has profit of what has been done with equal level entrance to trams, for example, and especially if I remember the elderly tourists going hundreds and hundreds of kilometers by bike during their vacation, they fail when there is such stairs to get up to the platform to return home by train with their bicycles. This is also an enormous important impact to intermodality from a cyclist perspective. I go through some other instruments. First, what's still poor in Germany is bicycle parking at bus stops in the countryside, especially. Therefore, just some images from other European countries, because I did not find so very fine ones from Germany. Next step is that you have these bicycle boxes, each bicycle in one box. This will need enormous space, and therefore I think it's used very seldom in compact cities. And this is the future, as I think, with lots of good innovation, that you have a collective parking with a chip card for a limited number of users that have access to this park. And again, if you look around Europe to have the finest examples, for example, in France, in these new metro, now used tram networks, at the end of the lines, you have those collective parkings. And then biggest form is bicycle garages at high volumes, from 500 bicycles up to, I don't know, in the Netherlands it's 5,000 up to 11,000. It's the maximum to be constructed just now in Utrecht. And you have various different conditions. In one case, you have an historic building that has to be reshaped into a bicycle garage, or you have on the bottom right the central bus station of the local bus operator with the passenger information center. This is combined then with a bicycle garage, and so on and so on. And what should not be forgot, because this is really the bottleneck, that it's the parking at home that has to be solved. And again, in Germany, we have not so many very good and sometimes very ugly garages in the street. What is the most interesting from my perspective is the experience from some cities in Belgium and Netherlands, where the local owned car parking company has got the political task also to care for bicycle parking in the neighborhoods. And so they created neighborhood parking garage for cyclists, for example, to rent an abandoned shop in the neighborhood to switch it very simply into a neighborhood bicycle parking. So coming to the accompanied bicycle in public transport, from my personal perspective, I'm a bit critical. We had very big, we have very big projects, for example, in the rural state of Sachsen-Anhalt, where since 20 years all use of public transport in regional public transport buses and trams, and especially regional railways, are free to take your bicycle in. This is very fine for the young people in the rural areas, because they are not dependent from the bus if they can combine the personal cycling with the regional rail. for example, to go to their workplaces without possessing an own car. The second is that there was a tradition in Berlin with up to 20,000 bicycles in the commuter railways per day. You should not forget that Berlin has a bit oversized public transport network that was constructed in 1930 about for 5 million inhabitants. So for a long time it had enough space for many, many cycles. This has changed in the meantime because for, well, financial problems of German railways, there was a reduction of services, and the tariff system is still there, but the social pressure for those who want to take their bicycle into the commuter S-Bahn is quite high, so that the actual use is dropping. So I think if you look to further future with high volumes, it might be a dead end to have this bringing bicycles into trains and trams and buses in volumes. But if your bicycle is broken, or if it is in the morning peak hour outside city and not inside city, I think flexibility is it. Next issue is that this restraints is a strong motivation to go to a bike sharing system. I will not talk about bike sharing system in Germany because there is nothing new compared to other countries, France and Spain. I think they went further than the late starter Germany in this area. But I think it's interesting to see that it's not just a city center for the bike sharing, but we see very fine sharing systems in the periphery, industrial areas, to go from the railway station the last 2-3 kilometers to the workplace itself, or to have a rental network for leisure where you can pick up your bicycle on one spot, and if there is bad weather coming, you leave it on another stop and continue by railway. And we have one very fine regional bike sharing system in the island of Usedom. Usedom is in the Baltic Sea, half Polish, half German, and we have a network of about 50 private tourist bike rentalers who have a network where you can pick up and leave your bicycle where you want to. And not to forget, we saw a similar picture from Barcelona. I think the newest generation going even further than the very beautiful pedelec sharing, but at very, very small scale, is now in Copenhagen. It's more or less a tablet computer on 2 wheels. We will see to what extent this enormous costly will get out of a niche at how high prices to use. So one other intermodality, because intermodality as a term originally came from freight transport, is on this pedelec for delivery. We have these messenger bikes in Berlin, a very fine project with these bento boxes, as they call it, consolidation center to mix the parcels for new. And I think this is a very important branch of cycling policy in future, because of the business community has a very strong interest to have a more sound and more efficient e-commerce in compact cities. So coming then to the pedelecs or electric bicycles, in Germany it is mainly still the vehicle of elderly who cycled all their lives and now at the age of 80, for example, want to keep their mobility patterns in old age without being so strong. So 3-wheelers for going to shopping is the matter, or bringing children to kindergarten. Also, 1/3 of the postmen and postwomen in Germany use such a pedelec in the meantime, and this shows that if there is a big volume of pedelecs ordered, you get a very good technique and very good prices for these electric bicycles. In the meantime, as you perhaps know, we have very, very many private bicycles in Germany compared to Spain. We have not this hard restriction of the flats that don't allow any bicycle in the surrounding. But what's interesting on the right side, that there is enormous effort made by the federal government to achieve 1 million electric cars until year 2020. Now that have achieved the first % of this million, and they say a first % is hardest than the other percents. But in the meantime, we have almost 2 million electric vehicles on 2 wheels, pedelecs, and this is not really recognized because this first million was not the hardest, but it just happened by the interest of the people, mostly of those people who live in the countryside and in the suburbs who have space to store it at home. But I think the effect on transport planning is enormous because this general trend from the old-fashioned cycle paths together with the pedestrian, you see these red lines still not removed yet. Back to the carriageway, I think this is the main new paradigm in cycling planning and also deeply fixed in the technical guidelines in the meantime. And this is strengthened by some quicker electric bicycles. Indeed, they are not very quick compared to the other bikes. The difference is more or less 3 to 5 kilometers per hour. But I think the assumption is that achieving 20 kilometers per hour, a bit more, should be a new basis for cycling schemes in the meantime. What is now the first reaction from planners to that is a charging station, because we know that from the electric cars where it's really needed, but we see that it's not needed for electric bicycles except the tourists who go 100 kilometers a day. But for daily commuting, I think charging battery twice a week is just enough. But on the other hand, what's not the problem with the e-cars, it's the theft, and this is the main obstacles to use the electric bicycle, and therefore also a big obstacle for the future intermodality. As DIFU, we gave advice to the National Cycling Plan that you now have to start to add all bike and ride with these charging stations, and what a shame. In the meantime, we say, oh, sorry, that was not good advice. Our recent advice in DIFU would be to wait for some few years, because the standardization of all these charging facilities is on the way. Also, integration of standards with Eastern Asia, and the first projects with the new standards are found, for example, in tourist areas in Bavaria, where you have the locking cable combined with a charging cable. So this sometimes I'm a bit irritated that a consensus in the planners community is overtaken by any technical progress in the meantime, that it's very, very quick. And also our approach to lock all valuable bicycles into a box, whether it's a single box or a collective box, also might be in a previous approach within 10 years, because the electronic locks of bicycles, as we know it from the cars, having big progress, so that if anybody who wants to steal a bicycle can drive the first 2 meters and then bicycle just stops. We don't know what will be the effect on the investment needs in future to care for the theft safety of all these valuable bicycles. So I skip that. At least I show just some actual projects, 1 slide per project. The first is that there is a new development in tourist areas, especially those tourist areas that are a bit apart from the main hotspots of tourists. For example, we have the beautiful valleys with lots of occupied hotels, but in the close countryside, in the mountains, nobody gets up the hill to to use these hotels, and therefore we have many bicycle buses. In the meantime, for example, in the southwest, Rheinland-Pfalz, where the Moselle and Rhine Valley attracts many visitors, you have a network of bicycle buses mainly going uphill, and then you go downhill, in many cases on a former abandoned railway, on greenways that were constructed a bit more than 100 years ago, because this was the hostile border region in the World War I between France and Germany, that created lots of regional railways that are no more used today. The second and possibly the most important project that we had in Germany on intermodality was to establish so-called Radstation, bicycle stations that combine the guarded parking, the bicycle rental, and the service and repair. And this was just adaptation from the close Netherlands. When I was a student, we had a joint research group of the Dutch cycling campaigners, the Fietsesbond, and the German ADFC, to have this exchange of information and exchange of politician makers, because on the day tour you could see it on the other side of the border. And one result of this bicycle association joint program was then that it became official policy in the North Rhine-Westphalia federal state close to Holland. And you see that 100 stations are not achieved yet, but compared to other federal states, you have a strong concentration in this area. The main obstacle is to operate it, because different from the Netherlands, we have no proper model with the German railway company to have a unique model to operate all this. But it depends on the engagement of the cities, and it's mostly combined with social projects to get unemployed people after long years into contact to potential clients again. And still today, the German railways say, no, we are market-oriented and capital-oriented. This is no business model, no business case for us. So that the effect finally was that the Transport Ministry of the region of North Rhine-Westphalia established a joint venture company, development company, with the German railway station and service to solve all these internal conflicts. And in the meantime, they are producing renovation of stations and their surroundings, including the bicycle stations by dozens. They have, I think, 200 of the stations renovated in the meantime, and I think 50 of them then have a bicycle garage like this. The main projects and most interesting project we now have is on the pedelecs, especially pedelecs in the countryside, and this is especially for the situation that you have a regional railway stop anywhere far and at the horizon, 10 kilometers away, and there is no real bus service, and there are mountains, so that nobody used it up to now to get to this regional railway station by bike. And now with the electric bicycles, there is a new chance to have a better coverage in rural areas with the here we are by the bicycles. In some cases, the ambitious projects to combine electric mobility by federal funding in favor of electric mobility in very, very rural areas with very, very few people involved. These projects are the most interesting just now, to have these new approaches of combining public transport and cycling. And at least one open matter is up to mention, that the multimodality and intermodality also is the question of the digital revolution, and that digital revolution leads to a lot of cards where you on a smart card have access to car sharing, to public transport season ticket, to bicycle parking, and these integrators become more and more important, and we have lots of projects creating a combination of mobility cards, smart cards, smartphone apps, and on the other side infrastructure where on one place all modes are assembled: the car sharing, the public transport, and the safe bicycle parking. And it's interesting perhaps for you to know that those mobility stations, Mobilstation we call it, also might be funded by this international emission trade money in order to to have a new approach to reduce CO2 in the long run. So I think that it was. All the rest you might read if the reader in Spanish language also will include my presentation. Thank you for your attention.